Sex and the City revival series And Just Like That didn't just shit the bed. It flooded the whole house with a torrent of televisual diarrhea so potent it stank up the entire franchise. It didn't have to be that way, of course. But not only did it make a number of historic missteps in the process of returning, AJLT also fell victim to tropes that other remakes and revivals have dodged like the quality-seeking missiles they are. Welcome to the Krusty Fox, and if you'd kindly drop a like and subscribe, we'll get into what went wrong and what, if anything, could help steady the ship. For the uninitiated, Sex and the City made its television debut in 1998 and ran until 2004 on HBO. It followed the exploits of its hopeless romantic main character, writer Carrie Bradshaw, and her three best friends: conservative art dealer Charlotte York, sex-positive PR guru Samantha Jones, and sort of centrist lawyer Miranda Hobbs. The show's main focus and the root of its success was the love lives of its four leads. A winning formula made up of outrageously unsuitable men, differing but nonetheless relatable outlooks on dating, and quite often a psychopathic selfishness that makes Hannah from Girls look like the Virgin Mary. It took a couple of seasons to find its footing, trimming the fat along the way. One such editorial decision, my favourite, as it happens, came when the show dropped the annoying narrative device of Carrie's fourth wall breaks. Because eye contact with Sarah Jessica Parker triggers my fight-or-flight response like I've just disturbed a Wendigo up to its elbows in a hiker's abdominal cavity. Eventually, the show became a cult hit, going from 4.5 million viewers for its debut episode to a record 10.6 million for the series finale, wherein Carrie finally bagged her Mr. Big, who she'd been on and off with since the very first episode, on a bridge over the River Seine. A scene I am still, to this day, convinced is at least partially responsible for Paris syndrome. The show's cult status led to a wildly successful 2008 movie of the same name, earning $418 million against a $65 million budget, and a less critically successful but still lucrative sequel in 2010. And even a spin-off CW prequel series, The Carrie Diaries, which we don't speak of. But behind the scenes, things were less rosy. The second movie got a well-deserved roasting for its cultural insensitivity, given that it went down like a Christian fundamentalist group hosting a tea dance in a leather bar's darkroom. And rumours began to fly that relationships between the show's main cast members were getting strained. A third movie descended into development hell and was eventually shelved. The prequel series was cancelled, and then nothing. Until the announcement in early 2021 that a revival series, And Just Like That, had been greenlit. When it debuted, critical reception was mixed, to say the least, and fans were split over some of its more radical departures from its predecessor. So, what was the problem? As if there was only one. We might as well get the major one out of the way first. For a variety of reasons, Kim Cattrall didn't return full-time as Samantha Jones. The main reason being a visceral hatred for Sarah Jessica Parker. This absence alone removed Sex and the City's most interesting character by quite a long way. A blow to any series, and a number of blows the men of NYC were therefore going to have to get from someone else. Then of course there's what this robbed the show of: its actual sexpert and main source of bedroom positivity, since Sam was often left to shoulder that burden alone during the original run. Without her, we were subjected to Carrie having an awkward bedtime chit-chat about whacking, Miranda getting repeatedly shocked, and Charlotte enthusiastically explaining her fondness for ball bath. Grim. It says something that Samantha's cameo in the most recent finale was the highlight of the season, and all that amounted to was roughly 1 minute of fluffy fan service. Either bring Samantha back full time or stop trying to replace her with pale imitations. Talking about you, Seema. Anyone with an ounce of common sense could work out that the majority of a revival series audience were also fans of its parent series. In which case, that revival needs to offer enough familiarity to entice those fans back and have enough in common with the original to keep them around. Apparently, HBO didn't get the memo. And just like that's problem is that it's a straightforward sequel in the same genre. And as a result, you can't make such fundamental changes to the characterizations you've built up since the 90s and expect to keep your legacy audience on side. It kind of gives the impression that you don't really know what you're doing. Speaking of which, I don't think it's unfair to say that AJLT had a bit of a problem with its plots, and in some cases lost them entirely, literally and figuratively. The show's mania in picking up and throwing away plot lines was enough to give you whiplash. Miranda's drinking problem and Carrie's implied cognitive issues came and went faster than a grinder hookup in a frat house. And when consistency was achieved, it was over the most bland, banal bollocks. Who tuned in every week to see whether Charlotte made friends with the most popular mom in school? Or for that matter, cared about literally anything that Lisa, Naya, Seema or Herbert got up to? Personally, I'd rather plait my own shit. Part of Sex and the City's early success was that its shorter runtime encouraged a snappy storytelling approach, coupled with a tendency to center any longer running plot threads around a story of the week format. Having access to twice the runtime but seemingly half the content often gave AJLT the same cringe factor as standing in awkward silence during a karaoke track's instrumental break. To be fair, aimless plots are a common pitfall of revival series. Gilmore Girls: A Year in the Life came in for similar criticism, as did The X-Files, which bore remarkable similarities to And Just Like That, in the sense that it also had 2 spin-off movies and, upon its return, featured a load of unsympathetic monsters. Why though? Why bother bringing back a long dormant franchise just to let the quality drop off a cliff? Because it doesn't actually matter. And Just Like That is the most viewed Max original production. And with the way the tax break axe has been chopping through their library, there's every chance at this point that it's Max's only production. Its renewal for a 3rd season, in spite of a consistently negative reaction, means one thing, and one thing only. It's making the network money. And as long as it keeps doing that, it can be as crap as it wants to be. What began as a lean towards over-the-top materialism in the between-series movies exploded into gross and unrelatable excess from the very start of And Just Like That, which is a misreading of Sex and the City's appeal on par with thinking the wide load sticker on the back of an 18-wheeler means the driver just came from a great night at a nearby truck stop. People related to SATC's characters because they were relatable. They lived lives most viewers could recognize at least something in, even in what you could generously describe as the show's heightened reality. Young Carrie had her credit card cut in half by a sales clerk and spent so much on shoes that she resorted to emotional blackmail to secure a loan to buy her apartment. Older Carrie seemingly buys straight off the runway, jets around the world at a moment's notice, and bought an apartment to impress her boyfriend, failing to anticipate his disappointment upon realizing that she'd also be living there. And Just Like That seems to be under the mistaken belief that all of this is representative of the average 50-something big city experience these days. Which, obviously, it isn't. I'm all for aspirational escapism, but this crosses the line into crass. What's the opposite of poverty porn? Wealth whackery, that's what this is. One of the more unique problems encountered by any revival of a classic series is the inherent and immediate need to undo whatever happened in the original finale. When you've got a near universally loathed conclusion, say a Dexter, that could be a good move. But for a Sex and the City with a generally well-received one, that's a difficult proposition. Like an indecent proposal from Elon Musk. Even more uniquely, this is the second time the franchise has had to roll back some of its happily ever afters. The season 6 finale of Sex and the City left all 4 leading ladies paired off and settled, which the first movie was then forced to remix in service of its story, with all the cack-handed grace of a DJ after one too many disco biscuits. AJLT was compelled to do a similar reset, and the undoing of those resolutions, whether it happens once or twice, creates a niche problem that few, if any, revivals have successfully solved. Namely, once your characters have everything they ever wanted, what else could ever feel as compelling? There's no going back now because that would make the most recent changes look even more pointless. They'd just do well not to rock the boat too much from now on. Now, to be fair, some returning legacy characters were fun nods to fans, like the resentful reappearance of Enid Frick and the manic energy brought by Bitsy Von Muffling's clutch of cameos. There is fun to be had in wondering who'll pop up next and finding out what became of them. Unless, of course, you're Nathan Lane's Bobby Fine, in which case you're just unceremoniously dead. But significant characters like Aiden and Natasha were shortchanged, brought back as they were to absolve Carrie of her past shenanigans and then disappear. Other legacy walk-ons fared even less well. Susan Sharon and arguably Annabelle Bronstein were just opportunities to point at the screen and go, "Oh yeah, her." Then consider who they haven't brought back. Amy Sedaris' Courtney, Jennifer Coolidge's Victoria, Kyle MacLachlan's Trey, Kat Dennings' Jenny, any of Carrie's other old flames who could now be firmly back in play. And while actress Lynn Cohen died in 2020, her character Magda hasn't even been mentioned. If anyone else is planned to return for Season 3 of AJLT, and there's every reason to suspect they will, then whatever brings them back into Carrie et al.'s orbit needs to have some meat on its bones. But if it's burger, I'm out. I'm not suffering through that online discourse again. One of my primary problems with AJLT's first 2 seasons was just how utterly joyless the whole endeavour was. Despite selling itself as a candid but uplifting window into the lives of women in their 50s, it left the kind of sour aftertaste that you'd normally get from men who smoke 2 packs a day. You know what I'm talking about. Miranda basically realised her whole life had been a lie, tanked her career, and ended up an anxiety-ridden 50-something roadie, which in any event all came to nothing when partner Che turned out to be as emotionally mature as a fruit roll-up. Charlotte's life was a shallow popularity contest that even she didn't want to be a part of in the end, which made 2 of us. SATC was mostly an upbeat affair, even in the moments that skewed more dramatic. You don't maintain, let alone increase, viewing figures by bumming your audience out for 45 minutes. Like a mangy old dog in the cone of shame, the revival couldn't seem to stop scratching at old wounds. I'm talking, of course, about its obsession with addressing what it thought were Sex and the City's major problems. Except its approach was like trying to fix the work of a crappy plumber by slapping some overalls on a raccoon and sending it into your walls with a toolbox. In a fairly common, present-day media maneuver, the end result of the learning journey that the show was at pains to show us it had been on was to hire a diverse roster of new cast members. This, pretty plainly, was to address the fact that SATC was so dazzlingly white that you could have used it to sell laundry pods. The problem is that AJLT took the concept of inclusion very literally. They just included a bunch of non-straight, non-white people and expected that to be enough, and ultimately ended up pleasing nobody. Certainly not the communities those characters were supposed to represent, and definitely not the kind of viewer whose reaction to seeing someone who doesn't look or act like them on TV is to burn down their house. All of which meant that when serious topics like race, gender, and sexual orientation were broached, it was with the kind of depth I used to inject into school projects I researched on Encarta 95 the night before they were due. Funnily enough, Doctor Who, of all the shows on TV, contained the secret recipe and just like that should have been looking to replicate. Perhaps unsurprisingly, a weekly serial which began airing in 1963 had some dodgy skeletons in its closet. But from its return in 2005, it repeatedly revisited and addressed its past and organically diversified its cast and content to reflect modern standards. And what could be more New York than a man living in a box and brandishing a screwdriver at you while ranting about aliens and time travel? Nothing, that's what. My working theory is that people wouldn't have had half as much of an issue with the show's diversification had it not been so shallow and tokenistic. So if And Just Like That is serious about addressing the past and being a meaningful part of the modern conversation, then it needs to do its homework. Preferably with something more recent than in Carter 95. Just like AJLT should have, I'm not going to waste much time spotlighting the youngest cast members. And to be honest, maybe I'm just biased. Because I f***ing hate kids. But for me, the legacy brats were far and away the most grating part of the revival. And what's worse is that it's entirely the show's fault. While they occasionally offered an interesting viewpoint on proceedings, most of the time they were just whiny, overprivileged story obstacles. And we've already got Carrie for that. My advice? Send them all off to college in season 3. Or maybe to a remote island. Or down a mine. Whatever. Nobody cares. Then there was Carrie herself. It might have been something if the revival had done a retrospective on how much of a relationship expert Carrie really was back in the 90s and noughties. Instead, the show proposed that she was a Mensa-level sex genius back then, and modern progressive sensibilities had rudely left her behind. In reality, the only difference between SATC Carrie and AJLT Carrie in terms of her chosen profession is that at least in the latter, she realised but refused to admit that she had no idea what she was talking about. As always, she wound up sidestepping her total lack of sexpertise and instead drew upon her most recent conformer for content, in this case becoming a widow. Which isn't massively surprising. If we're really honest, Sex and the City was the story of a prude with a newspaper column who thought she was breaking taboos if she so much as did it with the lights on. A husband dying on her probably had her convinced that she was in line for a Nobel Prize. If the revival wants to do something really watchable, then Carrie's overdue a reckoning. Instead of reading parties in Paris and universal praise for her literary tripe, let's see a backlash against what has to have been decades of dogshit relationship advice to her readers. There is a chance, of course, that having had 2 years to mull over the reaction to season 1 and 2, And Just Like That might begin fracking for quality in season 3. Personally, I'm not going to hold my breath. But what do you think? And can you think of any examples of revivals that actually got it right? Let me know in the comments below. Either way, thanks for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and as ever, if you can't be good, be crusty.